So, what are the impacts of refining and processing whole grains? So, in particular, we're looking at what happens when you take off that hard shell. So, last week we talked about how when you take off the shell of wheat, which is called wheat bran, you're left with the soft, gooey stuff in the middle, which is really yummy and tasty, and it's elastic and soft and very palatable and easy to digest. But the outer shell is called, say, wheat bran, or you could say oat bran or whatever. And there was a time where we threw out all the bran and we just kept the white gooey stuff and made white flour. But by chucking out the bran, we, at that time, this was decades ago, we underestimated what that would do to our health and the general impact of society. So we found out fairly early, say 30 or 40 years ago, that if we only ate the gooey bit and we didn't eat the fibre, we were going to run into some problems. Bearing in mind that, say, 60, 70, 80 years ago, we were only having grain with fibre in it. So only having flour, with fibre in it. Now we have the choice when we go to the supermarket, do we want white flour or brown flour or wholemeal flour? We have a choice. And if you're making a yummy cake, you're going to go for white flour. No fibre, all fibre taken out. So by refining our flours and taking all the different types of fibres out, particularly the insoluble fibres, we are then increasing our health risks of cardiovascular disease, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, diabetes, all sorts of things, not to mention bowel cancer. And then we have diverticulosis and hemorrhoids and all those other non-life-threatening conditions. So the effect of refining and processing is quite dire on our health and has brought us to the health issues that we have today in 2020. And it's a big reason why we have cardiovascular disease number one as our national problem. Okay, next slide. So as an activity, here's a link. It's called the Hungry Microbiome. It's very cute, and I think it helps you understand that we're alive inside and resistant starch has a role to play. And this is from the CSIRO. And remember, the CSIRO, can't remember what it stands for, but it's a government organisation that investigates the quality of food, agriculture, meat industry, etc. But if you want to know more about grains, this is the organisation that does the research. So they've put out this great video. So while you're watching, make a list of foods high in resistant starch. We did a slide on it. So we're talking about things like beans and legumes, and this is why some people also have a problem with beans and legumes, because they end up sometimes poorly digested in the large intestine, which is not ideal. But okay, time to watch the video. Now, the deficiency signs and symptoms. This is what I'm really interested in. How do you know if someone needs more fibre? Well, they can do the food zone test and do a calculation of the 24-hour fibre intake, which you all have to do. But there's also things like medication, stress, infections, and their disease presentation itself. That can give you a lot of information about whether they need fibre or not. Constipation, you firstly have to think, is there enough fibre? This is A, B, C of health. There may well be plenty of fibre in the diet and they're still constipated. Then you have to look for other sources. But fibre is at the top of the list. And then, do they have signs that their colon has been stretched? Or are there signs of inflammatory problems, signs of muscular strain in the bowel. These are things like hernias, diverticular disease, irritable bowel syndrome, and hemorrhoids. Infrequent bowel motions. This really is constipation, but you could say that, you know, you might go from one quality bowel motion a day to one every 2 days, which is technically called constipation, but it may not cause any discomfort, so you may call that infrequent bowel motions, or you just slow down. So maybe you're once every 1.5 days. And you might say to your practitioner, look, I've always gone at 8 o'clock every morning, and now sometimes I go at 8, sometimes I go at 12, sometimes I go at 6 at night. So that's also probably what you would call infrequent bowel motions. And then you've got pain, straining, bloating, gas, discomfort, and cramping. And a good dose of fibre could potentially fix all that. Then diarrhea or frequent bowel motions. So it can go both ways, fibre, remember that. This is a very well-known stool chart, and it's good to have a laminated copy of this under your desk when you're dealing with your clients. And incidentally, almost every client has digestive problems. So this isn't a rare occasion where you would have to bring out the Bristol stool chart. You really have to talk about bowel function with every single client, and you will find 90% of them have a problem with their digestive system. So if the thought of talking about poo is distasteful to you, you might have the wrong career, because we all have to do it. So better you start now. Better you start asking your friends and family about their digestive system and getting used to it, because there's no pride in this industry. We all talk about poo. So what's normal bowel function? It might be every 2 to 3 days to several times a day. That's what doctors say. That's what they say in medicine. What is normal? Now, in our industry, we're a little bit more ambitious with digestion, and we really like to have our clients do a bowel motion every day. So we've got different opinions and different camps here. We also traditionally like to look at the type, the shape of it, the colour, the smell, along with the time it takes to pass something. So if you ate corn 3 days ago and it came out this morning, that's a long transit time. Now, I think we're becoming a little bit less self-conscious with stools, because only last night I was watching a show on obesity and bowel microflora and frequency of stools, and how people have different microbial flora in their gut depending on their metabolism. So this information is becoming quite mainstream, and I think that we're becoming much more open about discussing type, colour and smell and transit time. We're aiming for a mid-brown coloured sausage, okay, and this is where you always get the giggles in the clinic room. And we need it to come out without a push, too much push. We don't want our clients to be sitting there for half an hour. It should come out with minimal effort. You should sit on the toilet, wait a little while, and then out it comes. You shouldn't have to rush to the toilet and be scared you're going to have an accident. You should have control over your stool enough to get to the toilet, and then it should take probably maximum, I would say, a minute or two to expel completely. It's a very common feeling for people to say they did a stool, but they didn't feel complete. So you're going to have to get used to talking this language, talking sausages, talking fluffy stools, liquid stools. The one at the top, type 1, separate hard lumps like nuts. Often that's described as sheep, what do they call it? Sheep's poo or rabbit poo. or pellets. So there's all sorts of terminology you're going to have to get used to. It might come out like a sausage, but it's got cracks in it, or it might dissolve. Yep, it sounds a bit ugly. So potential use of too much fibre. So we know that if you get up to over 50 grams, there might be problems. That's so hard to do. You would have to do too much Metamucil to get into a state where you had more than 50 grams. A normal healthy diet would not reach 50 grams. So it'd be very, very hard. I would say you die of boredom before you would get to the point where you're having too much fibre, because what you would be eating would be boring, unpalatable, and unsatisfying. If you've ever seen, if you've had a baby and you give a child teething husks, they're basically, what are they like? They're like biscuits that are made out of very high fibre, and they're not very palatable, which means the baby doesn't chew off a chunk of the teething husk. They just suck on it. So completely edible, but too hard or too difficult to digest. So a baby just sucks on the teething husk, and because babies, when they're teething, like to chew on something. It's sort of good to try and get the teeth through. So teething husks are made out of very high fibre. So if you had a very, very, very high fibre diet, it'd be like trying to eat teething husks. That's the only thing I can think of. But too much fibre, other than being very unpalatable, is going to give you a swollen gut. Now, when I was 17, 18 and I wanted to lose weight because I was not eating properly anyway, somebody told me to take Metamucil. So I was taking it after my meal, and I obviously didn't understand why I was taking it. And I remember getting extremely bloated and thinking, this is worse. I feel fatter than I've ever felt in my life. So if it's too much fibre, it will sit in the bowel and increase the bulk of your bowel to the point where everything swells up. So we don't want that either. You must increase your water content, particularly with the soluble fibres, because how are you going to get it to dissolve without water? So it's as simple as that. You can't just keep taking psyllium husk without the water. And there's plenty of people out there who drink 1 glass of water a day, if that. And often it's not. I've got clients who've never had a glass of water in their life. You can't go giving them high fibre diets or supplements, because they won't get the fibre out, and they're going to curse you because of their tummy pain. It may interfere with nutrient absorption due to increased transit time. So you don't want to push things out too fast, because you've got to have time to absorb food. People that have diarrhea lose all their good bits and pieces. So we don't want you to be going to the toilet 5 times a day. You'll end up very, very tired and unwell. It will increase intakes of chemicals and heavy metals. Can be an issue. Okay, so too much fibre, does that mean you're going to end up with more chemicals and heavy metals with the fibre? I don't know. So how can it be prevented? How can you stop yourself from having too much fibre? I guess you've got to be moderate. If you've been put on a high psyllium treatment, and your practitioner says to you, just do this once a day, don't do it 3 times a day. Okay, once is plenty. And then you just have to be moderate. Okay, now you don't want to eat 50 figs in a day. You just want to have, say, 5 figs a day regularly for the whole year. So it is about moderation. and be kind to your bowel. Complete digestive stool analysis. I've been doing CDSAs now for about 15 years, and you get heaps of great material out of this, heaps of great results. So it basically tests you from the stomach down to the rectum and all of the different functions that your digestive system does. And it does a lot. It's a very long passageway. It has all sorts of things that happen to it along the way. So your CDSA can measure stomach pH, some types of pancreatic and gallbladder function. It can test the good and bad microbes in your gut, can test your probiotics. It tests to see which antibiotics or herbal medicines work on you, all of this fun stuff. Whether you've got meat fibers, and most importantly, it will tell you if there are enough fibers generally. So we don't want too many meat fibers left in your stool. They should be all digested by the stomach. But we should find plenty of existing fiber in your stool sample, and if there's not, it will tell you. So that's fantastic. I remember the first CDSA I ever did many years ago, like I said, 15 years ago. My client, who was long standing with me, said, my stools are like peanut butter. They're slimy and they're sticky. And she said, and when I pass a bowel motion, I have to clean myself really well because of this consistency of peanut butter. So I have to say, at that time I was a bit stumped. I'd never really heard anyone tell me that description before, and I had done some CDSA training back then. That would have been exactly 16 years ago, so I remember being pregnant at the time, and CDSAs were so radically new back then. And so I'd done some training and thought, okay, can't wait till I find the right client. Of course, now I realize you should do it on every client, but back then it was, wow, I got to find a really good occasion to do a CDSA. So I did it on this client. She was Croatian, and quite often the Croatians as a culture have a very broad diet, plenty of vegetables and fish and whatever. So I really wasn't that concerned about her diet, but the only thing that came back in her stool sample was low fiber. That was it. Everything else was perfect. And I guess I was quite ignorant back then, because I was a bit surprised it hadn't actually occurred to me. I was thinking she had gallbladder problems, liver problems, too much fat in her stool, etc. But no, all of that was fine. And all we had to do was introduce fiber into her diet, and she did perfect poos after that. So that was my very first CDSA. Of course, now, like I said, I would prefer to do this with every single client. They're not cheap, but they're worth it. So I think now I can identify fiber, low fiber in the diet better than I could back then. And if you do enough CDSAs, you hear the symptoms and you think, yes, that came up in another CDSA, so I'll just do that and it works. So if you have the opportunity to do as many people as possible, do. Now, I sort of hit a bit of a brick wall with stool samples where I felt a bit uncomfortable asking my clients to do them. But something amazing happened when I did my own. So I'd highly recommend that you do your own stool sample as early in your career as possible. It's going to get you over that uncomfortable hurdle. Once I'd done my own, I was mega confident after that. I would just tell my clients exactly how it's done, what my favorite technique was, and if I've done it, I make them feel more comfortable about it. So my advice to you is to get comfortable with stool samples, because they are the way of the future. Now, I'll just point out here that if you go to see a GP, they will do something called a fecal multiplex, which is a very simple stool analysis. Now, please be aware that in the Medicare system, the fecal multiplex stool analysis or stool sample will only test for 6 different things. It will only test 6 parasites and bacterias. That is it. Now, a CDSA will test dozens and dozens of different ones. and all your good bacteria as well. And you might find that in a stool test, there's no bad guys, but there's not enough good guys. So there's not enough acidophilus or bifidus or something like that. So when you suggest a stool analysis to a client and they say, oh, my doctor's done one, it's a very, very different test. CDSAs have different levels, so they'll range from about $250 to $500. Not cheap, definitely worth it. A fecal multiplex from your GP is going to be free. You have to have good cause. You can't just go and have one. If you've been to Bali and got Bali belly, like most of my clients have, because Bali is such a popular destination, I'd always suggest they come back and whether they got sick or not, have a GP stool analysis, because that's really what it's good for, testing Giardia, blastocystis, dientamoeba, etc. But this is a very different stool analysis. It's testing the function of your digestive system, including the bad guys. Okay, so it's like the fecal multiplex, but 10 times more interesting. So they're very different, and you have to convey that to your client that this is a different stool analysis. This can potentially tell you if your stomach, gallbladder is working properly, whether you're digesting meat properly, whether you've got enough fiber, so many different results you can get from it. So we'll just stop there.